I promised to go over hip flexion and rotation in the Cossack. I did a few drills the other day that I got questions about, so I'll show you a few variations and why it's kind of important to test and then address your hip flexion and rotation separately if you want to be performing this drill. The sort of probably most difficult one for people to do is the one where we are basically going down all the way to the floor, internally rotating, coming back up, rocking forward, and then standing back up. So here we actually do need a lot of hip flexion. As you can see, like my thigh is hitting my calf. I'm pretty, like if we go sideways, that's pretty low down. But also I require a lot of ankle dorsiflexion here and a lot of hip rotation in order to then, show you, in order to then, so there's a lot of hip internal rotation going on there. But there's also a few other things. Sorry, my phone keeps cutting out. There's other things to consider, such as femur length as well, because for some people, this is going to be literally impossible simply because the femur and hip length is going to be just awkward. So there's a few things that you could do, which is raising the heel. First of all, if you're doing a Cossack, so something as simple as using a wedge can be helpful. So placing that heel on a wedge, suddenly you should be able to get into deeper hip flexion and knee flexion without having to necessarily work on that straight away. So you can work on the strength of your lateral squat and your Cossack squat, while then separately working on your hip flexion and perhaps ankle dorsiflexion. And then when we're talking about that hip internal rotation, definitely this is not what I'd be doing to get better at this. But if you want to be able to one day do that, then one of the things I'd recommend specifically for this movement is the half frog hip internal rotation, because you're in that adductor stretch as you're in this position. You want your ribs on the ground and you can meet, sorry, I need to get this so you can see it. You can do this exercise in a way that it meets you where you're at. If you're filming yourself, you can see where your back is starting to arch because you just don't have any more range from there. So you're going to go as far as you can in the range that you can control. Don't let it go to the point where your back is arching, and you can just simply work on repetitions. You'll do, say, 12 reps, then a 10-second isometric hold at the end while being strict with the back. Your hip rotation muscles should start to burn. You could do several sets of that. You can also start doing isometrics in that position. Let me know if you want to see an example of that. But the point is, working on your hip rotation, working on your hip flexion and your ankle dorsiflexion can take months because it's connective tissue that we're talking about as well. In the meantime, you can do the alternatives for the Cossack. I've got a YouTube video somewhere, I think, on progressions for it. But what I'd recommend is using a wedge. And also you can think about sitting to a bench if your range is just not that advanced yet. So a little combo of the bench and the wedge. So you can end up sitting yourself to the bench, pushing yourself back up, and then you can add, say, weights to that and start working on that range this way. We've got this variation, and then the other variation is actually raising your foot on a plate so the range is reduced. So you're here on this plate, and then you can work on it this way. Finding a solution for you, it can be complicated because you're looking at joint function as well as lever length. Let me know if that was helpful, and that is what I would recommend. 100% would recommend a joint assessment if you're struggling with things like this and you really want to achieve them. Then you really want to find out where you're limited so that you can work on those things specifically at the right ranges as well for you. Because if you're, say, just doing a drill that isn't quite hitting it, or you're not hitting it in enough volume, and you could be compensating, you need to figure that out before continuing for, say, 3 to 6 months, because it is like a 3 to 6 month process if you're in a stage where you're quite reduced in terms of hip flexion and hip rotations. You want to be working on that consistently, but also in the right way so that you're not wasting your own time. But I hope that's helpful.